Thank you, Chair. My presentation this morning is on the institutional framework for the implementation of the Mauritius strategy. As you know, the themes for Rio Plus 20 are on the green economy and the institutional framework. Much of the discussion so far has been on the green economy, and not much work has been done on the institutional framework. So this presentation, it's a first of its kind, and it's been done on the institutional framework for sustainable development in SIDS. In terms of the outline of the presentation, I'll give you some of the background context, the current status of implementation of the implementation structure for the Mauritius strategy, the evolution of SIDS participation in institutional environment and sustainable development, why there's a need for a new institutional structure, the aims and objectives of the proposed new structure, the main elements of the structure, and the proposed institutions at the international level. This proposal came out of a consensus reached by SIDS officials who attended the Commonwealth course on the international architecture for environment and sustainable development. There are 8 persons from the Pacific, 11 from the Caribbean, 29 from the Ames region, and of course 4 ComSec officials. It outlines the institutional framework, both at the global and the regional level, and the sort of political and policy context, as well as the reasons for establishing the proposed technical regional mechanism. In terms of the political and policy context, we are all aware of Chapter 17G in Agenda 21 that called for the sustainable development of small island developing states, and periodic meeting at the regional and global levels. And this, of course, led to the first SIDS conference in 1994 and the Barbados Program of Action. The Program of Action, of course, outlined 15 program areas and underscored the vulnerabilities of SIDS. And of course, it outlined the responsibilities of SIDS for their own sustainable development, as well as the assistance needed by SIDS. The 10-year review, the 2005 Mauritius strategy, strengthened some of the areas outlined in the BPOA, but also looked at the social and economic dimensions, as well as trade, the smooth transition, the LDCs from LDC status. And these are the areas here. Sorry, you can't see it so clearly, but there are 25 areas in the BPOA. No, that's 15 areas in the BPOA, sorry, and 20 in the MSI, climate change, freshwater resources, land resources, knowledge management, culture, and of course the implementation chapters. In terms of the current status of implementation of the BPO and the MSI, of course, if you read these 2 documents, the implementation approach, the approach is on a triangular level at both the national, regional, international levels. At international levels, the SIDS unit of UNDES was established in 1995, and that was one of the main output of the 1994 UN conference. At the regional level, at the Ames region, the IOC acted as the de facto regional implementation entity. And of course, the IOC is currently implementing an EU-funded project on the Mauritius strategy. In the Pacific region, the South Pacific Regional Environmental Program is the de facto regional implementation agency, because many of SREP's work programs fall within the BPOA and the MSI. In the Caribbean, in 1995, a joint coordinating mechanism was established between CARICOM, ECLAC, and the Caribbean Development Bank Cooperation Committee. And in 2006, a regional coordination mechanism for the MSI was established. Now, with these mechanisms, the 5-year review of the MSI found that they were not working so well, and The UNGA Resolution 65156 highlighted the need for a timely action for effective implementation of the MSI cooperation among SIDS, the need for increased level of resources. When we look at the evolution of SIDS in international environment and sustainable development, we can highlight 4 phases. Prior to 1992, it was obscurity. There's little knowledge about the sustainable development priorities of SIDS. Come 1994, with Chapter 17G, of course, at 1992, there's the recognition and acceptance phase. We have the BPOA, the MSI, where there's more knowledge about the sustainable development priorities of SIDS. We're now in what we can call the consolidation phase, and that requires an institutional structure, which I'll go into a proposal, concrete actions at both the national and regional levels, adequate and practical financial support, sound scientific research, capacity development, and technology transfer. And of course, the 4th phase we see as the designation phase, where SIDS is a special category, and this was discussed in the first panel in terms of there being recognition that SIDS are inherently vulnerable, and there is some confusion, I believe, between poverty and inherent vulnerability. With poverty, a country can grow out of poverty, and that's the case with LDCs, but with inherent vulnerability, there is nothing a SID, a small island developing state, can do about its inherent vulnerability. And that's evident in terms of the trade statistics of small island developing states. They tend to rely on one sector, most likely tourism, versus the LDC, for example, with vast natural resources, vast land areas, larger populations. In terms of growth, the LDCs, if you look at the real per capita growth of LDCs compared to the real per capita growth of small island developing states, you'll find that most LDCs are growing at a rate of 5% per annum, while SIDS most of them are below 5% real GDP growth per annum. So we see the designation phase as they call for a special category for SIDS. And I suppose in 2014 there'll be Barbados plus 20, where this can be the one of the major focus of that conference. The framework under which we discuss this regional this regional proposal was based on the quoted, that's the Caribbean Trade and Development Community meeting of September 2011, where they looked at what came out of the UNGA, and they came up with this, this paragraph. Any framework that evolves under the theme Institutional Framework for Sustainable Development must be designed in a manner so as to provide a clear institutional mechanism to address in a concrete and focused manner the sustainable development of the most vulnerable countries, say it's LDCs, at the global and regional levels. Such a mechanism provides inter alia context for enhanced UN coherence, the facilitation of adequate and predictable support or financial resources to facilitate transition, the sustainable green economies, given the financial gap which exists on most of these countries, as well as commitment to capacity development and technological transfer underpinned by sound science. Now, based on that, we did a simulation exercise as in the 3 regions, the AIMS, the Pacific, and the Caribbean region. And what I'm about to present as a proposal is an indication of the results, the actual results of that. The emphasis of the proposal is that there should be more a strengthening of interregional SIDS collaboration and more an enhanced interregional collaboration among SIDS. Both of these areas were identified in the UN General Assembly resolution. And of course, the role for AOSIS as the voice of SIDS need to be strengthened to ensure technical inputs from SIDS region to shape AOSIS negotiating positions. Now, why is there a need for this enhanced institutional framework? The global mechanism needs to be supported by 3 autonomous interregional intergovernmental organizations. The implementation, of course, of the regional dimensions of the BPOA has been weak. There's a lack of strong regional technical mechanism to implement the BPOA and MSI. And there need to be a more structured approach. And of course, SIDS' interest with respect to resource mobilization and the modalities for the identification and access to environmentally sound technologies need to be strengthened. The aims of this regional framework is to provide an institutional and intergovernmental structure and a platform for regional collaboration on the MSI. Of course, to facilitate the interaction, coordination, and complementarity of what happens at the regional level to what happens at the national level, to what happens at the regional and global level, and of course, to enhance the cooperation between the regions. And at the UN level, there's a UN interagency consultative group comprising a number of the UN agency. The Commonwealth Secretariat is also a part of that group. The objectives of the institutional framework, of course, would be technical advisory services to facilitate implementation, policy studies, project proposals, of course, inter and interregional collaboration and coordination, the formulating of common positions to support AOSIS and to bridging the gap between the national and regional level, public awareness and education, resource mobilization, and monitoring and evaluation. The main elements are an executive body comprising ministers, economic, social, environmental, because we know those are the 3 pillars of sustainable development, a high-level advisory group to provide advisory services comprising stakeholders from academic, civil society, private sector, and of course a secretariat, which would be the focal point within each of the SIDS region, and of course comprise a multinational staff employed from the respective SIDS regions. The ad hoc technical and scientific working groups to ensure sound technical guidance and to ensure greater synergies between the 3 pillars of sustainable development. And of course, the regional organizations should be involved to facilitate this. And of course, there should be some sort of national coordinator or national mechanism in each SIDS country, a national focal point to ensure the implementation of sustainable development within that country, but also to interface between the regions and the various agencies in the country. What are the main elements? In the Ames region, what came out of the discussion is that that mechanism should be nested within the IOC or within one of the universities in the region, for example, the University of Seychelles. In the Pacific region, the most appropriate institution, of course, is the STREP. Within the Caribbean, it's either the Caribbean Secretariat or the UWI Institute for Sustainable Development, which is already indicating interest. In terms of financing, it can be in cost sharing, the host institution providing physical space, operational costs, probably from the UN, or establishing a financing mechanism, and donors. At the international level, well, some of the suggestions at the international level, of course, there's the UN Office of the High Representative and the SIDS unit, but some of the suggestions that came out to the SIDS Commission and the SIDS Sustainability Secretariat, the strengthening of the Interagency Consultative Group, and of course the strengthening of the AOCs, and the establishment of a SIDS or Small States Trust Fund to facilitate implementing the BPO and MSI. In terms of strengthening AOCs, you know, AOCs has been in existence for 20 years, but the organizational structure remains weak. It's a coalition, loosely connected coalition without any formal structure. And the proposal is for the establishment of the AOC Secretariat to support the operations of AOCs, of course, operational guidelines, and the establishment of formal structured linkages between the proposed regional technical secretariat and AOCs. And here's it presented diagrammatically. Apologies, you can't see it very clearly. But there would be the secretariat and various regional institutions and stakeholders feeding into that, and of course the national level, the economic, social environment, the national coordinator. In conclusion, the UN Resolution 65156 that came out of the 5-year review of the MSI highlighted the deficiencies, and this proposed framework is the first attempt to design a regional institutional framework, and it's formulated following consultations with officials from all 3 SIDS regions, and it can form the basis for SIDS negotiations leading to Rio. If implemented, it would significantly enhance the implementation of the BPOA and MSI. So what are the next steps? We feel that two of the next steps should be, first of all, there should be some agreement by SIDS on an institutional framework, preferably using the model just presented. It can be done prior to Rio or immediately after Rio, and it may entail drafting a formal agreement. And of course, the appointment of a task force for a period of 6 to 9 months comprising officials from each of the SIDS regions. They can be given the terms of reference to prepare an organizational structure, to obtain donor financing for the initial years, to implement the institutional framework, and to support SIDS projects, and of course formulating a sustainable funding mechanism for the institutional framework. So with this, thank you very much for your attention.